back to Chuds BBQ, everybody. My name is Bradley Robinson, and today I'm going to give you my top 5 tips for how to trim a brisket like a professional. Coming up! Thank you, Bright Sellers, for sponsoring this episode. When it comes to achieving brisket perfection in your backyard, there's really not all that much to it. You need a good trim, a good cook, and then there's resting and slicing. But with such few steps, it's really imperative that you nail each one of these steps in order to achieve the results you're after. So over the next few videos, I'm going to give you my top 5 tips for each step of this process, starting today with the trim. Because especially here in Texas, when we're all using the same wood, very similar cookers, getting our briskets from the same places, a quality trim is really what's going to separate the good from the great, and is of the utmost importance for getting that perfect slice of brisket. So that being said, today I'm going to show you my top 5 tips for how to trim a brisket like a professional. This is a brisket. This is a USDA Prime brisket, which is something you want to aim for if you can. When it comes to briskets, you can get USDA Select, Choice, or Prime. And the different grades really tell you how much marbling and intramuscular fat there is in the meat. Select is the least, Choice is in the middle, and Prime is on top. And around these parts, Prime brisket really is the meat of choice. And that's because it's got enough fat to withstand a 24-hour cooking process, but not having too much fat where it's going to be too rich or break the bank too much. And if you're going to spend the next day and a half cooking a brisket, I highly recommend getting the best one you can afford, because it's really going to increase your chances of having a quality product at the end of the day. So let's get this thing opened up. To open up a brisket, I always tell people to score it on the Deckle Fat. On the meat side, there's a big chunk of fat right here, and that's where I always like to open up these packages. And the reason you want to open it on this Deckle Fat right here is because you don't want to put any scores into your meat. You know, oftentimes these things, oh my God. Yeah, oftentimes these things come with big scores in them. Anyway, this one is particularly mangled, which is rather unfortunate, but this was the only one they had at the grocery store, so I didn't really have much choice. But it's completely okay to score this Deckle Fat, because that is the first thing we're going to remove, which is really tip number 1. Remove this Deckle Fat. Sometimes you can get in there and pull it apart naturally. It's got a natural seam in there where it wants to kind of seam out, and sometimes you can actually just pull this whole thing out. But if not, just get the tip of your knife in there, find where it connects, and once you start pulling on it, you can start hearing it want it to tear out, and you can just help guide it along its journey here. And the real reason you want to take this out is because this is a whole bunch of fat. It may look like a lot of meat on there, but when you slice it in half, that is a huge chunk of fat that is not going to render, and you definitely don't want to leave this in there. Because when you're looking at the brisket, this is your lean and this is your point. So the lean comes all the way up here, from here all the way down, and the point sits on top of it, which means this slice right here is going to be your brisket burn ends, and then your best few slices of the entire brisket are right here. So if you were to leave this on or just shave it down, you're going to have a big chunk of fat running underneath your best slices of the entire brisket. So I like to remove it completely. A lot of people will just shave it down, but then they have to remove it on the board. So if you ever see someone throw down a fatty brisket and then take their knife and do a quick cut and swoop something away, it's just them removing this fat. So the way I see it, if you're going to remove it anyway, you might as well take it off now. That way we're going to get some extra bark on the underside of these burn ends and these few slices, which is going to give us a much better product. Tip number 2 for trimming a brisket is taking care of this backside. As you can see, this is a really jagged edge. We got a bunch of fat and silver skin running down this thing. So I'm going to just go through and clean this all up, starting by taking off some of this fat on the back and any silver skin that we run into, as well as just kind of tapering every edge. Oftentimes too, there'll be a big hump right here, and if that's the case, you can go through and shave it down a little bit. That's just going to ensure that this thing is sitting flat, so there's no high points on the other side. And when taking off this silver skin on the back, it's always great to cut with the grain. That way you're not going to be having any jagged slices or anything like that, and you can get your hand under here and kind of bend it up to make life a little bit easier. Now, I'm a lot more concerned about these jagged edges than I am with the silver skin, so if you're going to do anything on this side, it would be tapering these edges. You know, anything that comes to a point like that is going to get too crispy and cook before the rest of it does, which will lead to a hard, crispy bit that'll catch the serration of your slicing blade and shred your brisket when you're on the board at the end of the day. So I'm just going to round this corner off a little bit. What I like to do is kind of come through and just round off this whole end, making everything look as pretty and aerodynamic as possible. I'll see a lot of people too that'll come and take a whole inch off of this side. I think that's unnecessary. I like having some fat cap on this side. Helps out with the burn ends. And this is where I'll start taking some fat off. That'll that'll create a nice sharp angle, so when we flip this thing over, we'll know where to trim the fat cap. I've had this brisket in the freezer for the last couple hours just to get nice and cold. That's another great pro tip, especially if you're trimming it outside on a really hot summer day, because when fat warms up, it tends to smear a little bit and you're not gonna get clean cuts. Edges are looking nice, everything's rounded off. That's looking really nice to me. That's about as much silver skin as I'm gonna tackle. We can always come back to it at the end. Again, the silver skin's not really a big deal. It just doesn't really render out as well as, you know, fat or meat does. So it can kind of shrink up and pull your fibers in different directions. So that's why you might want to remove it. Also, you're gonna have better salt and smoke penetration into the meat. So as far as this backside is looking, that is looking pretty good to me. Nice and aerodynamic, nicely cleaned up. Let's flip it over. Tip number 3 for the perfect brisket is taking down this fat cap. You can see it's really thick right here. This is that kind of right angle I was talking about when we scooped it from the underside. That gives me a really good indication of how much needs to come off. And there's also a big chunk of fat right here. This is one that I see people, even professionals, missing all the time. It's right where the point meets the flat. There's always a big chunk of fat right there. And if you don't take care of that, you're gonna have this beautiful center cut slice of lean with a big pocket of fat on one end. And it is no bueno. So what I like to do is come to right where this meat ends, right where the point dips underneath the fat, and kind of come straight down until we get to the fat level on this brisket, and then scoop it all out. Again, just like the other side, that is 100% fat. And that's too much fat for a brisket slice. And that's really the name of the game when trimming a brisket, is we want to maximize the amount of sliceable brisket we get at the end of the day, as opposed to stuff that's just going to burn up or end in the chopped beef pile. So really we want to have some fat, but not too much fat. So that's why I like to scoop this out right where it starts. And this straight line is also a great indicator for whoever's going to be carving this thing on the block to know where to bisect this brisket, giving us our point meat versus our flat meat. And also for right now, it gives us a great starting point to take down this point meat, because this is sitting way too tall. That is just going to burn up. It's way too thin. It's not aerodynamic. So we're going to take that down. What I like to do is always keep it pressed against the board. That way I can see exactly how it's going to be sitting. If we have it sitting at a lump or something, it may look like the fat cap is higher than it is. So keep it pressed down, and then starting right here, we're going to just round this whole thing off to give this thing better aerodynamics. We're going to scoop out a bunch of this fat in here that we don't need. And yeah, we're going to lose some of this point meat, but this wouldn't be good sliced up anyway. So simply enough, just going to kind of come through and round this thing off. Again, we lost a little bit of this meat, which we would have to take off anyway, but also look at all that fat that came with it. And now we can tackle the rest of the fat cap, which is a lot easier to see now. We can kind of see right here where the point meat ends. That gives me a good indication of how much fat is on there. And you can kind of feel it too. It feels really hard, so I know there's a good amount of fat on there. And if you're new to trimming brisket, just go layer by layer until you get down to about that 1/4 inch of fat that we're looking for. Not much to it, folks. We'll take off that angle that we did on the other side. Right here you can see I'm getting pretty close. And if you do scalp it like that, it's really not the end of the world. It's not going to affect the cook much. And it does give you a great indication of how much fat is on this thing. Just trying to make it look pretty. Looking at the end here, we can see that there's still a good amount of fat on this exterior edge. One thing I like to do on some briskets, I'll shave it down this way. That way I can kind of tuck in a little bit on this side to make sure there's not too much fat. But we're just going to spend some time going around, making this thing look as good as we can. And right about there is looking pretty good to me. I like to give it the old Chuds scrape. That's just going to help get rid of your knife marks, make it look a little more smooth, just a better presentation. Make sure you have really even rub application. Probably doesn't do much. I just like it. At this point, we can also come over here and pay some more attention to some of this fat that we may have missed, because this is some pretty gross fat. It's kind of stretchy and stringy. Not good stuff. Just kind of peel as much of this away as we can. But I'm not trying to like dig it out or anything like that. And right about there is looking good to me. Before moving on, I want to thank the sponsor of this week's video, Bright Cellars. Bright Cellars is a monthly wine membership that uses a 7-question quiz to match you with wines based on your tastes. Wine matching your taste profile is then delivered straight to your door, making it super convenient to try new wines and take away the fear you have when you're standing in front of the giant wall of wine at your local grocery store. For me personally, I've never been much of a wine drinker. To be honest, I'm a little daunted by all the different varieties and regions, and I just feel like I don't know enough about it to even get started, which is why I love Bright Cellars, because all 6 of these bottles were matched to my taste preferences because of the quiz that I took. Each bottle comes with its own wine education card with suggestive pairings, tasting notes, and the best serving temps, which is exciting because at my next dinner party, I'm going to be very knowledgeable and pretend that I knew it all from my own knowledge. Bright Cellars offers wines beyond your typical grocery store, including low alcohol, sparkling wines, sustainable varieties, and biodynamic wines. Not to mention the package is completely recyclable, plastic free, and the smallest carbon footprint box in the industry. Right now I'm trying some Cabin 5, which is a medium-bodied red, and it suggests pairing it with bold smoky cheeses and swanky dinner parties. When I hear bold and smoky, that's kind of my lifestyle, and now I'm a little bit more swanky. So if you're looking to broaden your wine knowledge and find unique wines and hidden gems from vineyards all over the world, click the link in the description box of this video, taking you to brightcellars.com, where my link will give you 50% off your first 6-bottle box. Again, for a limited time, my followers will get 50% off their first 6-bottle box from Bright Cellars and get to try a whole bunch of wine that you know you're gonna love. Thank you, Bright Cellars. So to recap, step number 1 was remove that Deckle Fat. Step number 2 was to clean off this backside. Step number 3 was to take down this fat cap, including this big chunk right here. Step number 4 was to remove that Mohawk and really give this thing some good aerodynamics. And now step number 5 is to give this thing some overall good shape. Because if we were to throw this on right now, this lean is particularly long, which may dry out a little bit, especially on these ends. This end right here is very thin, and if you put that on, this would cook a lot quicker than this big thick part in the middle. So what would happen is this would overcook, dry out, dehydrate, and then bend up, and then you'd end up with a big pool of fat and grease right here, which would give you a bald spot and mess up your bark. Also on this backside, this point meat is looking way too big. That looks like it's just gonna burn up as well, so we're gonna take that down. And then right here, this is a big chunk of lean brisket, because remember, the lean is this entire muscle right here. So right here, we've got a really thick piece of lean meat without really much of a fat cap on it, so that's just gonna be dry. Again, it would make for some decent chopped beef, but I'd rather remove it now. So what I'm gonna do is give this the old swoop. So I'm gonna take down this lean side that we were just talking about over here, and I'm gonna give this thing some really nice shape, something along the lines of that, which will get rid of this thin end, this big chunk of lean. And this is also a great time to size your brisket. If you're gonna put this on a Weber or something and you really need to shrink it up, you could cheat this up even more. When making this first cut, I like to keep an eye on this side and try and go parallel with it to give the brisket a nice square shape. Always remembering to pat this thing out, and we're just gonna go for it. And this is that cut that makes everyone cringe on the internet, because why are you cutting off so much meat? And again, it's because we're trying to maximize the amount of beautiful sliced brisket, and none of this would come out great. Again, if you're just cooking in your backyard, you can do whatever you want, but if you're going for presentation and perfection, it's definitely worthwhile. Especially on this backside, if there's a bunch of meat without fat cap on it, it's gonna be getting the brunt of the force, because this is the side that we aim towards the fire. So we're gonna just take that down a little bit. And there we go, that backside is looking a lot better. This thing has got some really nice shape to it, beautiful looking brisket. And that's pretty much all you have to do. I usually like to go through one more time, maybe pay some attention to this fat if it needs to come down. If after all this trimming, the Mohawk here is still sitting pretty tall, you can take that down a little bit. I'm gonna go through and round off all the edges. I also like to go through, if I have the time, and just taper all these edges where we just made that cut. Just wanna round that off. And there we have it, folks. That is how to properly trim a brisket. This is looking pretty nice considering it's a pretty ugly brisket out of the gate. Again, that score is incredibly unfortunate, but I'm just gonna leave it and hope for the best. But definitely something to look for when you're searching for a brisket in the store. I think this is trimmed up to the best of this brisket's potential. It's aerodynamic, nothing's gonna pool up. We've got enough fat, but not too much fat. It's got really good shape to it and should cook up perfectly. I know it seems like a really aggressive trim to take that much meat and fat off of your brisket, but I promise you it is definitely worth it if you really want to get the best end results possible and have that barbecue joint quality brisket. You don't have to trim a brisket at all. You're just gonna have a bunch of burnt up meat and a bunch of unrendered fat that you're gonna have to carve off, leaving slices without bark in certain spots, and it's just not gonna be as pretty. But you can always take those burnt bits and throw them in your beans or make chili or something like that. But if you want to have the best results possible at the end of the day, a good trim is a great place to start. And remember, none of the trim is going to waste. Let me show you real quick. And there we have it, folks. Now we have got a perfectly trimmed brisket ready to hit the barbecue pit. We've got enough burgers to feed the family for a whole week and a jug of some beautiful beef tallow, all out of one cut. I know in every brisket video I say that I keep all the trimmings for making tallow and making burgers. This is also great for meatloaf, sausages, tacos, you name it. And we got a full quart of tallow, which is perfect for basting this thing when we wrap it. We can also deep fry these burgers if we wanted to, fry some chicken. The uses are endless, which is why I recommend doing such an aggressive trim, because now I know that this is gonna be perfect, these are gonna be perfect, this is great. And instead of having a bunch of burnt up chopped beef at the end of the day, I've got some beautiful brisket patties. Instead of having too much fat that people don't wanna eat because it didn't render down properly, we've got some beautiful tallow that we can grease our pit with, we can fry food in it. This really is the way to go if you cook a lot of brisket. I like a pickly burger. Come on. All right, y'all, and that is it. That is my 5 tips for the perfect brisket trim. I really hope you learned something in this video, or at least can understand why we trim briskets the way we do. And again, it's not just for that perfect looking brisket on the tray. Also, from a business perspective, it makes a lot of sense to have ground beef for burgers, beef tallow for any other recipe, as opposed to just a bunch of burnt up meat that you slice off of a brisket after a long cook. But that being said, if you enjoyed this video, let me know by hitting that subscribe button. Let YouTube know by dropping a like on this video. Feel free to leave a comment down below if you have any other trimming tips or techniques you want to let the world know about. If you give this trim a try for yourself, be sure to tag me on Instagram at Chuds BBQ. I'd love to see what y'all are cooking. Big shout out to the Patreon members. Thank you for supporting Team Chud and allowing me to keep making videos. And until the next time I see you, please go cook something outside. Peace.